Every night, a mysterious seal watched Elena from the shore, until the full moon revealed he was something far more extraordinary than she ever imagined. Elena Martinez never believed in fairy tales. At 28, she was all about facts, research, and hard science. So when her grandmother passed away and left her a small cottage on the Maine coast, Elena saw it as the perfect place to take a break from her busy life as a marine biologist. The cottage sat on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. It was old but charming, with weathered wooden walls and windows that faced the sea. Elena's grandmother had lived here alone for 40 years, and the locals always said she was a bit different. Some even whispered that she talked to the sea creatures like they were old friends. Elena didn't pay much attention to the local gossip. She had work to do. She was studying seal populations along the coast, and this area was known for its large groups of harbor seals. What she didn't expect was how quickly one particular seal would catch her attention. On her very first evening at the cottage, Elena sat on the back porch with her laptop, reviewing research notes. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. That's when she saw him, a large gray seal resting on the rocks below, about 50 yards from shore. What struck her as odd was how the seal seemed to be looking directly at her. Most seals were curious about humans but would swim away if they felt watched for too long. This one stayed put. Elena grabbed her binoculars for a better look. The seal was bigger than most harbor seals she had studied. His coat was a beautiful silver gray, and his dark eyes seemed almost human-like in their intelligence. For nearly an hour, they watched each other. Elena found herself fascinated by the creature's behavior. When she finally went inside for the night, she could swear the seal looked disappointed. The next morning, Elena walked down to the rocky shore to set up her research equipment. The seal was gone, but she noticed something strange. There were wet footprints on the rocks leading from the water's edge to a small cave nearby. The prints looked human-sized, which was impossible since Elena was the only person living in this isolated area. She shook her head and blamed it on the morning fog playing tricks with her eyes. Scientists needed to stick to facts, not let their imagination run wild. That evening, the seal returned to the same spot. This time, Elena decided to get closer. She climbed down the rocky path that led to the shore, moving slowly so she wouldn't scare the animal away. But again, the seal didn't seem afraid. Instead, it watched her approach with what looked like curiosity, maybe even hope. Elena stopped about 20 feet away and sat down on a large boulder. She had her notebook with her and began sketching the seal's features for her research. As she drew, she found herself talking to the creature, the way her grandmother used to talk to her cats. "You're quite the handsome fellow, aren't you?" she said softly. "Much bigger than the others I've seen around here. I wonder why you stay so close to shore." The seal made a soft sound, almost like he was trying to respond to her question. Elena laughed at herself. Here she was, having a conversation with a wild animal like some kind of fairy tale character. This routine continued for a week. Every evening, Elena would sit by the shore and the seal would appear. She started bringing her dinner outside, enjoying the peaceful company. The seal seemed to relax around her too, sometimes diving and playing in the waves as if showing off. Elena began to feel less lonely than she had in months. Her last relationship had ended badly, and she had been throwing herself into work to avoid dealing with the pain. But sitting here by the ocean, watching this magnificent creature, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. On the 8th night, Elena was inside the cottage going through her grandmother's old belongings when she found a collection of leather-bound journals. The books were filled with her grandmother's handwriting, documenting years of life by the sea. Most entries were ordinary notes about weather, visitors, and daily activities. But some pages made Elena pause. There were stories about creatures that lived in the ocean, not just fish and seals, but beings that could change their shape. Her grandmother wrote about selkies, mythical creatures from Celtic folklore that could transform from seals into humans. The entries weren't written like fairy tales or folklore. They read like factual observations. One entry made Elena's heart race. "The young selkie has been alone for so long. I see the sadness in his eyes when he watches the cottage. He's looking for someone to share his world with, but humans have disappointed him before. I hope someday he finds the connection he seeks." Elena closed the journal and looked out her window toward the ocean. The moon was full that night, casting a silver path across the water. She could see her seal friend on the rocks, but something was different. The creature seemed restless, moving back and forth along the rocky ledge. Without really thinking about why, Elena grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. She felt drawn to the shore in a way she couldn't explain. As she walked down the familiar path, she noticed the air felt charged with energy, like the moment before a thunderstorm. She reached her usual sitting spot and looked toward the rocks where the seal always rested. What she saw made her drop her flashlight. The seal was there, but he was changing. His sleek gray form seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, stretching and reshaping. Elena rubbed her eyes, sure she was seeing things. But when she looked again, a man was rising from where the seal had been. He was tall and lean, with the same silver-gray hair as the seal's coat. His skin had a pale glow in the moonlight, and when he turned toward her, she saw those same dark, intelligent eyes she had been looking into for over a week. The man stepped down from the rocks and walked toward her with fluid grace. Elena's logical mind screamed that this was impossible, but her heart recognized something familiar about his presence. When he was close enough for her to see his face clearly, he stopped. His expression was gentle but filled with a longing that made Elena's chest ache with sympathy. "You avoid me every night, human," he said, his voice deep and melodic like the sound of waves on stone. "Don't you want to be with me?" The words weren't demanding or threatening. They carried the weight of years of loneliness, of watching and hoping and being disappointed. Elena could hear the pain behind the question, the fear that he would be rejected once again. For a moment they stood there looking at each other. Elena's scientific mind battled with what her eyes had just witnessed. Everything she thought she knew about the world had just been turned upside down. Fear won the battle. Elena turned and ran back to the cottage, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the sound of the ocean waves. She locked the door behind her and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. Outside, she could hear the sound of someone walking around the cottage, but the footsteps were slow and sad, not threatening. After a few minutes, there was silence except for the distant sound of a splash, as if someone had returned to the sea. Elena spent the rest of the night sitting by her window, staring out at the moonlit ocean. Her grandmother's journal lay open beside her, and she read the entries about selkies over and over again. By morning, she had almost convinced herself that exhaustion and too much imagination had made her see things that weren't real. But deep down, she knew what she had witnessed was true. The question now was what she was going to do about it. Elena didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the seal transforming into a man under the moonlight. By morning, she had convinced herself it was all a dream brought on by stress and her grandmother's strange stories. But when she looked out her window at dawn, wet footprints led from the shore to the rocks and back to the water. Someone had been there. Elena spent the entire next day avoiding the ocean. She stayed inside, organizing her research notes and trying to focus on normal scientific things. But every few minutes she found herself looking toward the water, wondering if he was out there somewhere. The local library in town was small but had a surprising collection of folklore books. Elena drove there that afternoon, telling herself she was just curious about local legends. Nothing more. Mrs. Chen, the librarian, was delighted to help. She was a woman in her 70s who had lived in the area her whole life. "Oh, you must be Catherine's granddaughter," Mrs. Chen said warmly. "She used to come here often, always looking for the same types of books you're asking about now." "What do you mean?" Elena asked, trying to sound casual. "Stories about the sea people, selkies, mermaids, that sort of thing. Your grandmother was fascinated by our local legends. Some folks thought she was a bit odd, but I always found her quite knowledgeable." Mrs. Chen led Elena to a corner filled with old books about Celtic mythology and maritime folklore. Elena spent hours reading about selkies, creatures that could shed their sealskins to become human. According to the stories, selkies were gentle beings who lived mostly in the ocean, but occasionally came to shore. The legends said that selkies could fall in love with humans, but these relationships were often tragic. If a human stole a selkie sealskin, the selkie would be trapped on land until they could get it back. Most stories ended with the selkie eventually finding their skin and returning to the sea, leaving their human family behind. But Elena found other stories too. Tales of selkies who chose to stay with humans not because they were trapped, but because they found true love. These stories were rarer and usually involved some kind of curse or magical bond that made the relationship complicated. One book mentioned a legend specific to the Maine coast. It told of a Selkie prince who had been cursed to remain alone until he found a human who would accept him completely, knowing what he was. The curse had bound him to a specific stretch of coastline for over 200 years. Elena's hands trembled as she read the description of the location. It matched her grandmother's property perfectly. That evening, Elena couldn't bring herself to go outside. She made dinner and ate it by the window, watching the familiar rocks where the seal usually appeared. As the sun set, she saw the sleek gray form emerge from the water and take its usual position. The seal looked toward the cottage for a long time. Even from a distance, Elena could sense his disappointment when she didn't come outside. After an hour, he slipped back into the water and disappeared. Elena felt terrible. If the stories were true, this creature had been alone for centuries. She was probably the first person in years to show him any kindness, and now she was hiding from him out of fear. The next morning brought a violent storm. Rain lashed against the cottage windows and the wind howled like a living thing. Elena had planned to drive back to the library, but the weather made travel impossible. Around noon, the storm got worse. Elena was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. It was a cry of pain, coming from somewhere near the shore. She grabbed her raincoat and flashlight, fighting against the wind as she made her way down to the rocky beach. The waves were huge, crashing against the rocks with tremendous force. At first she couldn't see anything through the rain and spray. Then she spotted a dark shape wedged between two large boulders. It was the seal, and he was hurt. Elena didn't think about her fear or the impossibility of what she had seen 2 nights ago. All she could think about was helping an injured animal. She climbed over the slippery rocks, getting soaked by the waves until she reached the trapped creature. The seal was barely conscious, a deep gash across his side bleeding into the salt water. His breathing was labored and his usually bright eyes were clouded with pain. "Hey there, buddy," Elena said softly, the same way she had talked to him during their peaceful evenings together. "Let's get you out of here." It took all her strength to help the heavy animal out from between the rocks. The seal was too weak to resist as she half-carried, half-dragged him to the small cave she had noticed on her first day. The cave was dry and sheltered from the storm. Elena ran back to the cottage and grabbed her first aid supplies, some old towels, and a battery-powered lantern. When she returned to the cave, the seal was still breathing but very weak. She had some experience treating injured marine animals from her research work. The wound needed to be cleaned and bandaged, but she wasn't sure how the seal would react to her touch. "I'm going to help you," she said gently, settling beside him in the dim cave. "I know you're scared, but I won't hurt you." As Elena began cleaning the wound, something amazing happened. The seal looked directly into her eyes, and she felt a connection that went beyond words. It was as if he was thanking her, trusting her completely. The injury was serious but not life-threatening. Elena worked carefully, cleaning away the blood and salt water, then applying antiseptic and bandages. The seal remained perfectly still throughout the process, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed almost like words. "There," Elena said when she finished. "You should be okay, but you need to rest and let that heal." She arranged the towels into a comfortable bed and helped the seal settle onto it. The storm was still raging outside, so they were both stuck in the cave for the time being. As the hours passed, Elena found herself talking to her patient the way she used to talk to her pet dog when she was a child. She told him about her work, her fears about the strange things she had witnessed, and her loneliness since her relationship ended. The seal listened to everything, his intelligent eyes never leaving her face. Sometimes he would make small sounds that seemed like responses to her comments. As evening approached, the storm finally began to calm. Elena was getting ready to help the seal back to the water when something extraordinary happened. The seal's form began to shimmer, just as it had that night under the full moon. But this time Elena didn't run. Maybe it was because she had spent the day caring for him, or maybe she was finally ready to accept what her eyes were telling her. The transformation was beautiful and strange. His seal form stretched and changed, becoming taller, more human-shaped. When the shimmering stopped, a man lay on the towels where the seal had been. He was exactly as Elena remembered from that night on the beach. Silver-gray hair, pale skin with that subtle glow, and those same dark, soulful eyes. But now she could see the bandages she had applied, wrapped around his human torso exactly where the seal's injury had been. "Thank you," he said quietly. his voice weak but filled with gratitude. I haven't felt such kindness in more years than I can count. Elena stared at him, her logical mind finally accepting what her heart had already known. This was real. He was real. You're hurt, she said, the scientist in her taking over. You shouldn't transform when you're injured. It might make the wound worse. He smiled at her concern and the expression transformed his entire face. You're not afraid of me. I was, Elena admitted. But I've had time to think. And right now you're injured and need help. That's more important than being afraid. The man tried to sit up but winced in pain. Elena immediately moved to help him, supporting his weight with her shoulder. What's your name? She asked. Kale, he replied. I've been waiting so long for someone like you, Elena. She started to ask how he knew her name, then remembered all the evenings they had spent together by the shore. He had been listening to everything she said. How long have you been alone? Elena asked gently. Kale's expression grew distant and sad. 237 years. That's when the curse began. Elena felt her heart break a little at the loneliness in his voice. Whatever fear she still felt was overwhelmed by compassion for this being who had suffered for so long. Tell me about the curse, she said. And in the flickering light of the lantern, with the storm finally passing outside their sheltered cave, Kale began to tell Elena his story. Elena threw herself into fighting the development project with the determination of someone who had finally found something worth fighting for. She spent her days making phone calls, sending emails, and gathering evidence about the unique ecosystem along the coastline. The developers, however, were not going to give up easily. They had money, political connections, and lawyers who specialized in getting around environmental protection laws. Within a week, Elena discovered they had already started the legal process to buy the land. We need more than just environmental arguments, Elena told Kale one evening as they sat in the cottage kitchen. Papers and laptop computers covered every surface as Elena worked on building their case. We need to prove this area has special scientific or historical value that makes it legally protected. Kyle watched her work with a mixture of admiration and worry. You're doing so much for me, he said quietly. But what about your own life? Your job is waiting for you in California. Your career, your future. Elena stopped typing and looked at him. Over the past few weeks, she had been avoiding this exact conversation. She knew her time in Maine was supposed to be temporary, but the thought of leaving Kale behind felt impossible now. My supervisor called again yesterday, she admitted. The university wants me back in 2 weeks. They're offering me a promotion, leading my own research team. Kyle's face fell. That's wonderful news for you, is it? Elena asked. A month ago I would have said yes, but now I'm not sure what I want anymore. The truth was, Elena had been happier in the past few weeks than she had been in years. Her relationship with Kale had awakened parts of herself she didn't even know existed. She felt more connected to nature, more aware of the magic that existed in the world, more alive than she had ever felt in her structured academic life. But choosing to stay would mean giving up everything she had worked for. Her career, her reputation, her financial security. She would be starting over completely in a small town where most people didn't understand her research. I can't ask you to give up your dreams for me, Kale said. I've already caused enough pain for humans who got too close to my world. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. His skin was always slightly cool, reminding her of seawater. You're not asking me to do anything. This is my choice. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Elena wasn't expecting anyone, especially this late in the evening. She looked through the window and saw a woman in her 50s standing on the porch. Elena Martinez? The woman asked when Elena opened the door. I'm Dr. Patricia Wells from the Maine Department of Marine Resources. I received your emails about the Coastal Development Project. Elena invited Dr. Wells inside, and they spent the next 2 hours going over Elena's research. Dr. Wells was impressed by the detailed documentation Elena had gathered about the local marine ecosystem. You've done excellent work here, Dr. Wells said. But I have to be honest with you. The developers have already secured most of their permits. Stopping them at this point would require evidence of something truly extraordinary in this area. After Dr. Wells left, Elena sat in the kitchen feeling defeated. All her scientific training, all her professional connections, and it still might not be enough to save Kale's home. There is one thing we haven't tried, Kale said carefully. What do you mean? Kale was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with some internal decision. I could show her what I really am. If Dr. Wells saw a Selkie with her own eyes, she would know this coastline is truly special. Elena felt her heart skip a beat. Kale, no. If people find out about you, it could be dangerous. Remember what happened to your family. That was different, Kale said. Those people came with fear and weapons. Dr. Wells is a scientist like you. She might understand. Elena shook her head firmly. It's too risky. We'll find another way. But as the days passed, it became clear that their options were running out. The developers had scheduled a town meeting for the following week to present their plans to the community. Once they had local support, the project would be almost impossible to stop. Elena's deadline to return to California was also approaching fast. Her supervisor had called twice more, and the university was starting to lose patience with her delays. The stress was taking its toll on both Elena and Kale. Kale was transforming back to seal form more frequently, staying underwater for longer periods. Elena knew he was struggling with the possibility that he might lose both his home and the first person who had truly accepted him in over 2 centuries. 3 days before the town meeting, disaster struck in a way neither of them expected. Elena was in town gathering supplies when she ran into David Morrison, one of the developers. He was a smooth-talking man in his 40s who wore expensive clothes and drove a luxury car that looked out of place in the small coastal town. You must be the marine biologist who's been asking questions about our project, he said with a fake smile. I've been hoping to meet you. Elena tried to be polite but kept the conversation short. However, Morrison seemed determined to chat. I understand you've been living in the old Catherine Martinez cottage, he said. Lovely property. We've actually been hoping to include that land in our resort development. Elena's blood ran cold. My grandmother's cottage isn't for sale. Everything is for sale for the right price, Morrison replied smoothly. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer. Much more than that old place is worth. I'm not interested, Elena said firmly. Morrison's fake smile faltered slightly. I think you should reconsider. Our environmental impact studies have shown some concerning issues with that stretch of coastline. Old septic systems, potential groundwater contamination. The county might decide the area needs to be cleared for public health reasons. The threat was clear, even though Morrison never said it directly. If Elena didn't sell voluntarily, they would find legal ways to force her out. Elena drove home with her hands shaking on the steering wheel. When she told Kale what had happened, his face went dark with anger. They're trying to intimidate you, he said. This is exactly the kind of behavior I've watched humans display for centuries. They take what they want and destroy anything that gets in their way. That night, Elena barely slept. She felt trapped between impossible choices. If she stayed and fought, she might lose everything and still fail to save Kale's home. If she left, she would be abandoning him to face this alone. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Chen from the library came to the cottage, bringing a box of old documents. I've been thinking about your research, Mrs. Chen said. Your grandmother asked me to keep these papers safe, but I think now is the time to share them. The box contained decades of her grandmother's careful documentation about the local Selkie population. Catherine Martinez had been secretly studying and protecting Selkies for 40 years. Her notes included detailed observations about their behavior, their importance to the ocean ecosystem, and their intelligence. Most importantly, Catherine had documented several instances where Selkies had saved human lives. Fishermen rescued from storms, children pulled from dangerous currents, boats guided safely to shore in heavy fog. The Selkies had been silently protecting the human community for generations. Your grandmother believed the Selkies were a vital part of this coastline, Mrs. Chen explained. She said they were like guardians of the sea. Without them, this area would lose something precious that could never be replaced. Elena felt tears in her eyes as she read her grandmother's notes. Catherine had known about Kale all along. She had understood his loneliness and his importance, but she had also respected his secret. There's one more thing, Mrs. Chen said quietly. Your grandmother left specific instructions. If developers ever threatened this coastline, I was to give you these documents and tell you that sometimes the most important scientific discoveries require courage more than caution. After Mrs. Chen left, Elena sat with her grandmother's papers spread across the kitchen table. Kyle read them too, his eyes wide with amazement. She documented everything, he whispered. She understood what my people meant to this place. Elena made her decision.
We're going to the town meeting tomorrow, she said.
And we're going to tell them the truth. Kale looked at her with fear and hope warring in his expression. Are you sure? Elena thought about all the safe, careful choices she had made in her life. Her academic career had been built on playing it safe, following established rules, avoiding risks. But the most important things in life weren't safe or careful. I'm sure, she said. It's time for both of us to stop hiding. The next evening, as they walked toward the community center where the town meeting was being held, Elena felt like she was walking toward the edge of a cliff. She had no idea what would happen when she revealed Kale's true nature to a room full of strangers. But as she looked at Kale beside her, still in human form but ready to transform if necessary, she knew they were making the right choice. Some things were worth fighting for, even if the fight seemed impossible to win.